The following is a presentation of Geekster Media.
Remember that show back then? Remember that show? Turn on the TV, time was always flying. Why did they have to end? So many shows you forgotten. Now that we've got a podcast, we can release all the shows from our hands. Yeah, will you be the most TV dudes you'll ever listen to? As long as we keep on talking sitcoms and cartoons from back in the day. Okay, we confess, we're obsessed, but we got a podcast to help you remember that show.
Greetings, TV lovers. Having jumped over a row of cars just to make it to the recording on time, I'm William Bruce West.
And just finishing up buffing out my molecular bonded shell, I'm Adam. And this is Remember That Show? The podcast where we revisit the obscure or forgotten TV shows of the 80s and 90s. Today's show spun out of the idea that one man can make a difference. If that's true, then what happens if that concept is multiplied exponentially? However, before we get into that whole math problem, let's take a look back at our own TV-obsessed childhoods in a segment we call Theme Song.
Our show today focused on the descendant of one of the most popular cars of 80s popular culture. Adam, do you have a favorite pop culture means of transportation?
I actually do, and this might, I don't know how obscure this is for folks out there, but it's not a car, it's not a jet, it's not Airwolf, it's none of that. It's KITT Cloud Kicker's airfoil from Tailspin, because there was nothing cooler to me in the early 90s than Marty McFly getting a hoverboard in Back to the Future Part 2. But it was earthbound. It couldn't work on water unless you have power. I might get canceled for that. KITT, though, took it to the next level in that he could literally surf the skies. Plus, he had the cool backwards baseball cap. He was a total 90s bear kid. Plus, it was collapsible, so he could just like keep it in his pocket and it would fan out, you know, and then he could write it in an emergency. So everything about that captured my imagination because it also seemed plausible. Like I could build one and have it ready if I ever got dropped out of a plane, you know? I could surf the skies too. What about you? Well, because I know today's vehicle is your guy, but is there another?
That's a tough one because I love any property where there is like a car that's at the center of things. You know, it's like here, there's KITT, or like the Ecto-1 was a big deal to me. Even like, I mean, culturally it's bad, but the General Lee, like I didn't know what that was about at the time. I love watching those boys jump over bales of hay, but I feel like this answer could change depending on the day. Today, I'm going to say the Enterprise D. Like specifically the Enterprise D. That is the ship from Star Trek The Next Generation. That is my Star Trek. I never really liked the original series. I see that ship and it does nothing for me. But there's something about the D in how like implausibly built it is. Like if you've never seen it, it is a giant saucer, like an oval saucer, and then a tiny star drive section. It's top heavy. It makes no sense. If I were an old school Trekkie, I would have hated the D, but it's like, it's so important to my like upbringing. Just seeing it can bring a tear to my eye. So the Enterprise D.
It is a great design. I mean, I can't argue that. Like, as crazy as it looks, I mean, it's got like fallopian tube design is what it really looks like, but it's sleek and it's, yeah, compared to the original, it's pretty awesome. One of the most memorable aspects of this franchise that we're talking about is the talking car. While not such a futuristic concept today, well, with, you know, OnStar system and GPS, it really does set the show apart, at least it did at the time, making viewers feel like they were seeing the future of automobiles and computing. So, Will, this is interesting because it was a voice coming out of a car. What is your favorite disembodied voice in general in pop culture? Is there something that like comes to mind, this voice that just appears out of nowhere?
Man, it's like there's a theme going on. I kind of have Star Trek on the brain right now. So, like, just to follow that, when I thought of this question at first, I was like, Zordon. Of course, Power Rangers. He's a big giant head. Like, you don't get more disembodied than that. But honestly, it's Majel Barrett, who was Gene Roddenberry's wife, and she is the voice of the computer on Star Trek. She is the voice of the computer throughout the franchise until she died. You know, so it's like she's the computer on the Next Generation. She's the computer on DS9. She's the computer on Voyager. Like, she is this constant. She is basically the 24th century version of the you've got mail guy. So it's just kind of like, again, it comes down to that. I mean, I got to the point where my phone sounds right now are like a Star Trek doorbell, and like my ringtone is like incoming subspace transmission. If you haven't figured out by now, I'm regressing back to my safe space. So it's bringing all this stuff out up to the surface, basically. What about you? I think I know yours based on something we discussed recently, but I could be wrong.
So yes, you are right that when we talked about Out of This World, that's immediately what came to mind for me. But we've talked at length about Troy from Out of This World, the space cube pyramid, thing. So really what actually I realized going back to my safe space, my Saturday morning cartoon days, it was Nanny from Muppet Babies. Now, here's the thing. We see her body, but we never see her face. And the voice of Barbara Billingsley, who was the mom on Leave It to Beaver, for those who don't know, it's soothing, but it's also eerie because it's technically not connected to a human being. Like, there's just so many unknowns with Nanny that it's ultimately a disembodied voice that I associate with green and white striped socks. So that one's like a very key one for me.
I never knew that was Mrs. Cleaver.
Yeah, it is off-putting to me as well with the new Muppet Babies that's on Disney Plus because it's a very young voice. And I'm just
Jenny
like,
Slate.
yeah, I'm like, it's supposed to be an old lady, not somebody from Saturday Night Live.
Yeah. The 80s were so frustrating because I don't like mysteries that can't be solved. So anytime there is one of those like mystery characters, like we never saw Nanny's face, we never saw Dr. Claw except for that like figure that only came out in Europe. It's like I hate those things. It's just like, show me your face.
What do you got to hide, Nanny?
Right.
Well, Will, our car today, who started it all, KITT, he had a red light that went back and forth, but we got to find out how his show got the green light.
Knight Rider was but one of the many successful shows developed by 80s NBC president Brandon Tartikoff in his quest to put the once fabled network back on the map. Premiering in September of 1982, Knight Rider is something of an update of the Lone Ranger concept, with show creator Glenn A. Larson stating in an interview, "It's one man comes into town and he has a little bit more going on for him than the people think. And that's a great theme. I didn't make that concept up. That's just what it is." The key difference here is that the one man, played by former soap opera star David Hasselhoff, was Michael Knight, a former detective now aided in his crusade for justice by a high-tech talking Pontiac Trans Am known as the Knight Industries 2000, or KITT for short. For 4 seasons, viewers tuned in weekly to see what daring feat KITT would perform in the duo's latest mission from their handlers at the Foundation for Law and Government. Adam, did you watch the show during its original run? And what are your earliest memories of the exploits of Michael and KITT?
Well, I definitely watched Knight Rider as a kid because I turned every black Matchbox sports car I had into KITT. And I used to role play as Michael Knight and just like talk into my wrist. Turbo boost, KITT. The thing though, I realized is I was not clocking any of the plot lines, any of the character relationships. Like I didn't know that, the mechanics switched out from one season to the other, like any of that stuff. I knew Devin because I was like, oh, there's an old guy with white hair, but like that was about it. In my brain, I was never asking, why was Michael Knight chasing bad guys? Because I couldn't tell you. Was he a government law enforcement agent? No idea. But he looked awesome in his leather jacket. I like the blinking lights on KITT's dashboard control panel. And really, it comes down to the Dukes of Hazzard effect, because I also love that. So they were jumping the General Lee over things every episode. And all I was waiting for on Knight Rider was my fix of turbo boost. That was my favorite thing, you know? So I definitely was so aware of it, but I never connected any of the dots. It was just like, it's a cool thing that exists and I like it. And I know it might be a different story.
Oh yeah, I watched it during its original run. Even though we've talked about like chronologically, this is when I wasn't a kid yet. Like this is like I'm coming out of the Murder She Wrote 60 Minutes era, but like I was watching NBC for Knight Rider. I was insane about Knight Rider, but like you, it's really just about turbo boost, super pursuit mode. It's about the car. Like I didn't know anything about Michael and Devin. I didn't notice that Bonnie became April, who became Bonnie again. It was interesting they got like TC3 in the last season. It's like, oh, they have a minority friend, you know? But I loved Knight Rider. I mean, my mom got me like a Knight Rider watch, and it was one of those. Nowadays, we fondly refer to them as peg toys, but I used to always call them like toys for poor kids because they weren't like real toys. You know, you get them at like the drugstore and they're just like on a card. It was that kind of thing. Like I had that Knight Rider watch, which I actually just bought another one off eBay, like in the last 6 months, just for like the memory of it. But Coleco, which is a company that went out of business long ago, but before Power Wheels were a thing, they had pedal cars. So I currently have the KITT pedal car in my mom's shed. I have 2 Coleco big wheels of Knight Rider. You know, like if it was Knight Rider, I had to have it. But again, it was all about the car. That's just such a sexy car. And it wasn't until, so I'm watching it in real time. This is like the mid 80s, but it was probably, I'm going to say like 1991, 92, where I'm watching it in syndication and I happen to catch the pilot and I'm like, what is this? Who is that guy? He kind of looks like Hasselhoff, but that's Hasselhoff's voice. Like, I watched this show for like a decade before I really understood what it was about, you know, because that pilot's kind of a trip. It's almost like Men in Black when you're like, oh, they think he's dead, you know? So, like, I have a long history with it. I will jump at anything with Knight Rider in it, which has got us here today, but that's my history with the franchise.
Yeah, well, let's dive a little bit before we get into the show that we're here to discuss. There were other iterations and incarnations. You know, Michael and KITT faced all sorts of foes. You know, they're thieves and smugglers. KITT's own evil predecessor, the Knight automated roving robot or car, voiced by Optimus Prime himself, right? Yep. Peter Cullen. Like all things, however, the show had to come to an end, but Universal began thinking of ways to continue the concept almost immediately. And their first attempt was the NBC movie Knight Rider 2000, which was meant to be something of a backdoor pilot for a new take on the series. So airing in 1991, but set in the titular year of 2000, the movie was a direct sequel to the TV series and saw an older retired Michael Knight teaming up with a female partner in a future where crime is on the rise, and yet the police have been defunded. And this time the car is at the center of things, and this was called the Knight 4000, which primarily consisted of a customized Dodge Stealth. And when this movie failed to result in a revival of the series, Universal would go on to try again in 1994 with the TV movie Knight Rider 2010 as part of its syndicated action pack programming block. And this incarnation was basically Knight Rider in name only because it focused on a smuggler in a Mad Max style dystopian future who just happens to have a talking car, only this time the car isn't artificial intelligence, but rather the consciousness of a woman that had been downloaded in some sort of cyber crystal. Anyway, needless to say, this too missed the point of the original Knight Rider concept. So, Will, you said you were going after anything with the Knight Rider name on it. Did you watch either of these TV movies? And if so, what were your general thoughts?
Oh yeah. Knight Rider 2000 was like appointment television when I was in, what's this, 91? I was in 3rd grade. This is so sad. Like a lot of people, they think of like, oh, Bambi's mom or Littlefoot's mom. A lot of dead moms in movies when we were growing up of like the first movie death that like affected them. The first movie death that affected me was when Devin dies in Knight Rider 2000 because if you watch the movie, he didn't have to die. It's real messed up. But also you get this whole like montage, like you know how they say your life flashes before your eyes before you die, and like before he dies, you see this like montage of footage from the original series. You're like, oh, it's that thing from when I was 3, and like I carried the weight of Devin Miles's death with me for like a good month, you know. So it's like that meant a lot, to the point where when I first discovered eBay in college, one of the first things I bought, like we talked about this when we talked about like Gen 13 for something else, but I bought the Knight Rider 2000 movie on like VHS that someone had like recorded and mastered. I think I still have that thing here somewhere. So that was really important, and it was elusive. So that didn't pan out. It's fine. Still had Baywatch, still had Hasselhoff. But the weird thing about the action pack, there were certain properties that they really loved and supported, like let's say Hercules and Xena. And then there were certain ones, even it was this like martial arts franchise that had Vanishing Sun. It had like 7 movies. But then like there were all these smaller properties that you'd see like a clip of it in their sizzle reel. And I remember seeing Knight Rider 2010, but this is like I said, 94. There's no internet. There's no way to get information on it. So I saw on the TV guide it was coming on. I watched it for 2 hours. I'm like, what the heck is this? What is this? And then we never spoke of it again. You know, like no one talks. I don't think anyone watched it that night. I've never stumbled into a chat room where it's like, hey, what was that about? You know, so it's like, I watched both of them. And I think I'm the only person since the new timeline who remembers they exist. How about you?
Well, I definitely watched Knight Rider 2000. I think I mentioned this on our Baywatch Nights episode, but I distinctly remember being in a family friend's house for dinner one night. I had seen the promo, Knight Rider 2000 is happening, so I just ditched everybody else and went to their TV and turned on Knight Rider 2000 and was watching it. I have vague recollections of Knight Rider 2010, like you said, from the sizzle reel, because I was fascinated by the action pack programming block. The logo for that was just so perfect, whether it was the Bandit movies or Tech War and all the stuff that they would put into that. Like, I was not tuning in regularly, but they were playing, and I talked about on the Out of This World episode, KTLA Channel 5. That's where all the syndicated shows were. Those were the ones I went to Fox instead and watched their syndicated shows. Then would come back after Bandit or something played. The only thing about Bandit I remember is just seeing Elizabeth Berkley from Saved by the Bell was like the girlfriend in one of the Bandit movies. I don't know if she was in all of them, but the one I saw like the last 15 minutes of or something, there she was. I was like, Jessie Spano in something, because it's before Showgirls that I knew about. So I'm just like, she's in something else. I can't believe it. Yeah, definitely like Knight Rider 2000 to me is the biggest memory. And overall, I just remember being like, why is Michael Knight? He just seemed kind of like, I don't really want to be here. And realistically, Hasselhoff didn't, because he's trying to get Baywatch off the ground in syndication when that's happening.
Yeah, I actually read that he knew he was already committed to Baywatch. That's why like the movie's kind of a passing the torch movie, but he had convinced Tartikoff to do 4 TV movies because he thought he could get away from Baywatch enough to do that. And then NBC wouldn't agree to do 4. They're like, we'll do 1. And then Universal was like, well, you got to give us 2 to make this worthwhile. And NBC said, no, we'll stick with 1. That's why it didn't go anywhere.
And obviously it wasn't like anybody wanted to see, unfortunately, who he was passing the torch to. This woman with a bit of circuitry from KITT in her brain, but she wasn't that engaging. You didn't really want to see her. She didn't have the charisma. So yeah.
She had big sister energy. You know, she wasn't a star. She was just kind of like,
Yes. Speaking of the history of the revivals of Knight Rider were kind of up and down. And when it comes to up and down, it means we got to get into our elevator pitch.
Eventually, Universal decided it was time to take another crack at the Knight Rider franchise, and they released Team Knight Rider as a weekly syndicated action series in the fall of 1997. Designed as a present-day continuation of the 80s series, yet set chronologically before the possible events of Knight Rider 2000, whereas the original series followed a one-man, one-car formula, this new series followed 5 people and 5 cars. Each car had an artificial intelligence personality meant to complement its driver. At this point, the leadership of the Foundation for Law and Government had come to believe that one man could have too much power, so it was divided amongst multiple drivers. The team was composed of everything from former military to former thieves to hackers, all under the direction of Flag.
And each week, Team Knight Rider would be deployed to bring in criminals who operate above the law. The team members included former CIA Kyle Stewart, the team leader who served as the driver for Ford Expedition Dante, former Marine Jenny Andrews, who drove Ford Mustang Domino, who happened to be voiced by my big fat Greek wedding star Nia Vardalos, former Chicago cop Duke De Palma, driver of Ford F-150 Attack Beast, former con artist and thief Erica West, who rode the high-tech motorcycle Cat, and Kevin Trek Sanders, the team tech specialist who rode the high-tech motorcycle Plato, voiced by Tales from the Crypt's John Kassir. To play up the team angle, Cat and Plato could combine to form the high-speed pursuit vehicle. We will talk more about that later. Over the course of one 22-episode season, Team Knight Rider would expand upon the mythos of the original series with more and more ties revealed as the season progressed. Not only are we introduced to potential successors to KITT, but there are also implied familial ties to the 80s series. So, Will, this is something you've been talking about since we started the show, since before the show ever existed. You obviously watched Team Knight Rider, but was it when it originally aired?
Oh yes, every week. Like my mom and I went to like a wedding one weekend. Like it was like the daughter of a coworker of hers. I was like, we gotta get home so I watch Team Knight Rider. You know, like this wasn't a show that I taped. This wasn't a show that I watched like the second airing. I was watching them all live. And again, like at this point, this was probably like junior year of high school. This is loser behavior. I wasn't going to school like, hey, did you guys catch Team Knight Rider? Maybe they were watching VIP because Pam had done Playboy, but nobody cared about Team Knight Rider. So I was just alone in this. And like to show my age, I went to college in 99. This show ended in like 98, right? The internet was young enough that there was one website devoted to Team Knight Rider. It was like a GeoCities site too. Like if people saw it today, they would think it was like Egyptian like hieroglyphics, you know? But like that's how this was. Now it's like there's Knight Rider Online and all these other sites. There was one site, I think it had the opening credits encoded with Real Player, which took like 2 hours to download on a T3 connection. But it's like I have searched the world for any mention of this show, anything. Like it was never released physically in America. There was like a German set, and that's when I learned about like region codes and things like that. Hot Wheels released 2 vehicle sets, which I own. They came out with Dante and they came out with Attack Beast. I have scoured the globe for anything Team Knight Rider. So that's why we are here today. How about you?
Oh no, I definitely, I mean, this flew past my radar. Like I did not, I think I've heard like vague mentions of it over some time, but like really even the logo, usually like I'd be like, oh, I remember the visuals of a promo going on TV. Like it looks like the VR Troopers logo to me. I don't know, the Team Knight Rider logo, but like just like, no, like I didn't know anything about this. And so this has been a real learning experience for me, just to be like, wow, like this forgotten like blip. Yes, we said that the Knight Rider 2010 is maybe even more obscure, but because at least this had like 22 episodes that did air, you know, but it's just like one of those situations where I'm just like, wow, how did this pass me by? And I have so many thoughts because this was an experience to watch. So I say, why don't we get into our cheers? I have to say, because this episode feels like a companion piece or a sister episode to Baywatch Nights, this show is definitely better than Baywatch Nights, okay? You might say that's a low bar, but that's where Hasselhoff was at this time. This show's launching. He's just wrapping up Baywatch Nights, and it's clear the producers wanted him so badly to be part of Team Knight Rider, and I'm sure you'll get into this. Michael Knight is mentioned so often, but instead he's off making his incoherent, kind of boring X-Files ripoff series by the second season. So this show, I will say, ultimately is kind of a goofy mess, but the plots are at least interesting enough that they don't drag with the weight of so much filler like every episode of Baywatch Nights did. It's a fun show. Like, there's an episode called Iron Maiden. There's this woman named Star who gets control of these suits of armor that they actually look like what the kids wore at the end of Masters of the Maze when we watched that show. Like, it's almost the same design, but like she has to mind control these guys inside the suit, and one of those ends up being Duke, like he's going undercover, but then he's under her influence. Like, there's a lot of cool little twists and turns. There's an obvious backdoor pilot called Spy Girls that's about a Charlie's Angels style team of, female, special agents, but they don't have a man in charge of them, like they're off doing their thing. And I think you mentioned VIP, like VIP kind of probably stole their thunder, what they could have done there. And obviously with the tie-ins to the universe, like you said, the best episode for a fan is probably the alternate KITT Gone Bad, where they meet the psychotic AI car Crow, right? And they have to team up with his equally twisted driver to try to like outsmart the car. But then, I don't know, it's got a real T2 ending to it also. But everything about the show, like overall, you're kind of like, okay, it works, it doesn't really work, but it's interesting. It's always interesting to watch. So I really applaud them for that. So like, how do you feel, Will? Like,
definitely. I mean, it's a fun show. That's what brought me in. We've talked about, I am an expert on weekend syndication of the 90s. And like, you had everything from like VIP, which was basically a live action cartoon, to She Spies, which was in that same vein. But then if you want to get to like vehicle stuff, there's Viper. And Viper was an overly serious car commercial. Like that show lasted way longer than it should have. And it's really, the focus is on the car that is a car you can actually go to a dealership and purchase. And that's kind of the deal here. TKR makes no bones about this is a Ford commercial. Like, you are going to see the logos. These are models you can go out and get today. The focus is the cars and their voices and their personalities. If there's one thing missing based on the era, it's the gestalt nature of like, what if they all could form up into like a supercar? But you kind of get that with the motorcycle. Like, it's very Power Rangers Voltron. Everybody brings something different to the table, and it's a fun show. I looked forward to it it wasn't just a way to like pass the time or like, oh, here this is. And also, this is gonna sound really dumb, but because of like how all these shows were, I like, and this is where somebody's gonna like correct me, I liked that this was like good old-fashioned cheap action made in America, because so many of these shows are done on the cheap in like Vancouver, and it's Vancouver. Somebody used to say like Vancouver looks like New York, Illinois. It's like such a nondescript city, but it's a city. And like, this was good old-fashioned cheap California filming, and like there were a lot of concepts here that I have seen borrowed elsewhere later on. Like, their headquarters, since there's a team, they can't be in a semi, so they're on a cargo plane, which is the Sky One. Well, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. comes along. What's their headquarters? It's a cargo plane. Like, there's shades of that. There were a lot of interesting things that could be done here, even outside of Michael Knight. Like, I think it got desperate near the end and really tried to tie its way back to bring in people, but I felt that it had evolved past the original series. Like, the original series, it's one car that never really makes it east of the Mississippi. Like, there's no like Michael goes to New York. It's always the desert. It's always like Arizona or something. But like, it's a multinational corporation at this point. There's European Knight vehicles. There's the Knight KA. And then there's like, I just like world building. I'm a big fan of world building, and I thought it did a great job there.
Well, and you mentioned, the budget there, this cheap syndicated budget, but to me, where I feel like half the budget every episode went to were the explosions.
Yes.
Because the pyro in this show is out of control. They are plentiful, these explosions. They are huge. They are worthy of a blockbuster film. Like, I'm really not that thrilled by things that go boom, but every time a fireball would flare up on the road, I was just flabbergasted that this was a syndicated TV show because they pulled out all the stops with the stunts, flipping cars. Although, I do have to say, most of the stunt cars used, like not the main fleet of Ford vehicles, but every other car that would be on the road looked like it was from 1984. You could tell that's going to get blown up because that is an old car they pulled out of some lot. Like, it looked like it was from the original series. And that cracked me up because I was just like, this is 1997. Why is there this old, like, Oldsmobile on the road?
But it makes the night cars look better by comparison, you know? But you bring up the pyro. I loved that. That played into like 90s teenage boy. And I know you like moved away from the franchise by this point, but like once Power Rangers moved to New Zealand, they got a different set of rules over there. And it was pyro crazy for the first like 5 Disney years where you're like, I think someone died in that scene. So it's just like this catered to that like little boy wants to see things go boom.
And I want to talk a little bit about the cast too, because to me, as far as the cast goes, Erica and Trek are the best characters in my mind on the show. Like, Erica is just the most natural and fun presence on screen in any scene. She looked like she should have been on some ABC comedy, like some sitcom, maybe playing Dharma instead of Jenna Elfman on Dharma and Greg or something like that. Like, she gives the best reactions. The episodes that revolve around her are the most entertaining because, again, she's like a former thief. And so, like, she gets pulled into that world going undercover and stuff. Like, that's neat. But then there's Trek. And he is a pop culture nerd. He's got cool 90s guy long hair. So I'm instantly Team Trek, which also sounds like a good title for a spinoff of Team Knight Rider. Just do Team Trek instead. He cracks me up the most. This is why I fell in love with him, because the actor is just doing an impression of Christian Slater every second he is on screen. I don't know how familiar you are with Christian Slater's work. Christian Slater's whole persona, and he's admitted to this, is he was imitating Jack Nicholson. So Trek is a copy of a copy, and it's just hilarious to me in a very meta way, but just his whole speech pattern, everything, Christian Slater.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that in the sense that, like, Erica is Selena Kyle with a talking motorcycle. Like, that's a spinoff right there. And I'm always fascinated by Trek, especially in hindsight, in that he's really the only one from that show who went anywhere. Like, you still see Nick Wexler pop up on things, and he plays a lot of villains now, which is very interesting. Like, he doesn't have the hair anymore, but, like, he's not that much older than we are. Like, he was kind of like the insert character for the audience. I want to say he's between like 46 and 48, you know? And like, he is the one I have kind of followed after that show. But definitely, if you are a Trekkie and into sci-fi and you like the like requisite hacker character that every 90s property had to have, then you're gonna love Trek.
Yeah, I mean, he's just constantly like quoting movies, and so is Plato, his motorcycle, but I like to a lesser extent. But ultimately, I grew to love these characters with each episode I watched. It was just like, oh, I'm excited to see what they're up to this week. And again, it still has its faults, but I would say the characterizations were well defined enough that I knew what to expect from each member of the team and even their automobile counterparts. So to me, that's a mark of a show with decent writers, that they understood what each character would do in each new situation of the week, and it was consistent. Because you see some shows and it's just like, just whatever the story calls for, that character is going to change, you know, do a 180 or whatever. So that's what gave me the warm syndicated action buzz, you know, like to watch. It's just like, okay, but I get to see what Erica's going to do this week. I get to see what Jenny's going to be up to this week, you know. And I probably only watched like half the episodes, but watching those, I was pretty impressed by that.
Yeah, the characterizations are great. I mean, like with Kyle, he's your like straight-laced Scott Summers leader. You're not gonna get a lot of backstory on Kyle, but you still trust him, and like you know he's capable, and like he is the leader. He gives forth leader. He's not like an inefficient leader. Like you know he earned that position. Honestly, the weakest character to me is Jenny because she's the Michelle Rodriguez character before we knew Michelle. It's that archetype, but like they make her interesting near the end by tying her into the ultimate mythos. Which did you see those episodes?
I didn't watch the very last one. I saw it because like I think it's at the end of the pilot, right? That she is trying to hack into the information on Michael Knight. And then there's something else teased in a different episode that, yeah, she might be related to Michael Knight, right?
Well, it's one of those threads that like the 2008 Knight Rider picks on too, where Michael was sleeping with a lot of women. like that's how those episodes ends. Like KITT's like, Michael, we should get back to the semi, and he's like, well, I think I want to hang out here for a few days, so it's like Jenny just might have been a souvenir from one of those trips, even though the ages didn't really match up. That always kind of bothered me. I was like, you're like 35, but like it was interesting to see them head in that direction.
All right, well, let's get into our cheers.
Boo! Boo! Boo!
First off, I think we're both going to be in agreement on this, but 10 new personalities is too much to take in as a viewer. It was one thing, again, the original series, 4 seasons, building the relationship between Michael Knight and KITT. And then, Michael has his support team. But this one tries to make the banter between 5 different vehicles and their drivers matter and fails terribly. Like the cars' attitudes are ultimately very annoying. And even if they weren't, that interplay gets very little screen time anyway. The relationship between the cars and the drivers is just like pre-established, and there's conversations about it briefly, but you never just spend the time with them alone. It feels like it's more about the Team Knight Rider human relationships, and the vehicles are an afterthought that are meant to add some humor, but don't accomplish that most of the time. Like Tom Kane as Dante, he's just wannabe KITT. John Kassir as Plato does bad celebrity impressions. He quotes TV shows and movies. It's really bad. Beast is just a generic sexist tough guy. Kat the motorcycle has no personality at all. Like she gets lines, but you're just like, God, I don't understand what she does to help Erica. Now, I think Domino would have been the way to go if they had just done a single gender swap Knight Rider. Because with Nia Vardalos, like it's awesome the way she gives the character some energy, a little bit of sexiness. She's like, she actually plays into like a phone operator voice joke at one point. She says, do you know how many men I've seduced successfully over the phone or something like that? It's just funny. This car knows how sexy it is, but she just gives it great personality. So like that was the one that worked for me, but the other 4 do not. And so I was a little upset. The way that I loved KITT from the old series was not able to translate into this one.
They're not very mission focused. It's almost like Mystery Science Theater 3000 put on top of a mission. So it's like, here it is. You're trying to stop this bomb from going off, and you've got a motorcycle thinking it's Jack Nicholson. It's like, you're not helping here. KITT was mission focused. And also, KITT's personality was juxtaposed to Michael's. They complemented each other. But I felt the personalities of these cars were too similar to their drivers. It's like KITT and Michael would have conflict that would result in like the best resolution for the mission. But I never got that from these vehicles and their drivers. It's like, hey, this car talk. Like, and I feel like that ultimately is why they can never successfully reboot this franchise, because there's more to it than just a talking car. All of our cars talk now. But like this series showed just how vapid and how just like useless that is unless it's focused.
Yeah, unless the writing has a point and has a purpose. And I want to also mention, like, so I said Beast, he's a car. Attack Beast is a car, but he is sexist. Like, and he has some problems, but really the whole show is pretty crappy to the women overall. Like during the pilot, Kyle as the leader is always shooting down Jenny's ideas like she's too emotionally motivated. And like she's kind of written, especially like the first half of the season, as being difficult and always rebellious because she's an independent thinker who doesn't follow the male leader. And I was just like, oh, this is not a good look. Side note though, the actress who plays Jenny should have gone by her own name on the series because Christine Steele.
Yeah.
That just fits the character so much better than Jenny.
Right. I think I had like Teenage Will had this backstory, like this head canon that maybe Kyle and Jenny used to be a thing. You know,
They play
it's
with
like,
that a little bit, yeah.
because it's
potentially.
like he's like you said in the pilot, he really comes down on her hard, and it's like I get she's too close to that mission, but it's such a like in media res pilot, like it's not an origin story, which like most of us aren't used to. It's like we want to see like how did you guys get together?
Yeah.
How were the cars calibrated? Like none of that. It's like
Nothing.
our cars talk, we fight for the government. Like that's it. That's all you need to know.
That definitely was a something that's also on my list, is just that like I get no backstory, and they mention in little bits of dialogue, this person used to do this person used to do this, but that's about all you get. Now, one of those people is Erica, who is a thief. However, as written, her only skill seems to be seduction to get information. That is her deal in so
She's
many
a thief of
episodes.
hearts.
Yeah, and she even comments at one point. She says, I wish I could have a mission where my equipment didn't involve a push-up bra. And that just kind of says it all. And they were obviously aware of it, the people writing the show, but they're like, we got to have sex appeal in the show. And like, but even that, like the guys on the team get into some real locker room talk, especially like during the Spy Girls episode, but in other ones too. Like they see Jenny almost get into what they call a cat fight on some footage, you know, which is a situation that happens more than once in the series. Ooh, feels like I'm watching an episode of Dynasty. Like anytime the women are getting physical, and all she can do is just roll her eyes like, boys. And Beast, this talking pickup truck that I started with, he's always hitting on her. So he's like sexually harassing her. So like change his programming. He doesn't have to, you know, be allowed to do that. And again, 1997. I understand the time frame we're in, but even this seemed egregious. And I think they knew what they were doing and they just didn't write against it, you know?
No, it's like, no. 2024, it's sexual harassment. 1997, it's just flirting. It's just a car flirting. You know, like I think with me, it's the same because you brought it up earlier about like comparing this to Baywatch Nights, and it's the same problem here where they got too concerned with chasing the X-Files. Because as the season progresses, like it crawls up its own butt in mythology. Just like X-Files had cigarette smoking man, this has the mysterious guy in the electric wheelchair. And then at some point it turns out that KITT is on the electric wheelchair, like to make longtime viewers care. And it's not the censor bar. Like it's nothing familiar that we know. It's just like, oh yeah, you see that electronic box on that wheelchair? Yeah, that's KITT. And then it turns into this whole mystery like, well, why does he have KITT? And what does this mean for the world? Which then culminates in my biggest jeer ever, which is the final scene of the series or the season finale. So we've already alluded to it at this point. Jenny discovers that she's probably the daughter of Michael Knight, but when they're trying to get answers, they end up at the grave of Michael Knight, only to be met by Michael Knight, shot from behind, who is built nothing like Hasselhoff, and he sounds like Uncle Ben from the Raimi Spider-Man. Like, they didn't even try. They didn't want to send Hasselhoff a hundo for his likeness rights, or just say, like, hey, could you, like, leave this recording on our answering machine? You know, something. And I'm sure they felt like, well, if we get a second season, surely we'll get David, and we'll put all this to rest. But being that's what it ended on, it's just kind of like, this really missed the mark.
Yeah. The other thing I want to say, like on a tech side, because there were limitations to what they could accomplish in 1997, especially with their budget, but they were really obsessed with floating heads as the upgraded form of like radio communication in this series. So like when they're at their command center, like you said, their little Voltron command center or whatever, where there's a head that'll be projected up, you know, out of this little console thing, or it might appear on a watch dial. well. And it is like just such bad superimposing of the talking character. It gets very distracting. And it also, with that, whenever the cars are talking, there's a screen in a room and it's just a 360 graphic of the car spinning with the name of the car on the screen, which gets really tedious after a while. It's like even the just digital voice bars that were hopping up and down when KITT talked, that was engaging. You were like, oh, okay.
It was a screensaver for like 97, you know, like I definitely know what you mean. But I will say, because this is kind of like when we look at like, where are flying cars? You know that like all pop culture of that era was like, when we communicate at the highest tech possible, it's gonna be through holograms. Like, I'm disappointed we're not recording this right now through holograms. Like, your head should be projected right in my office, and we are not there, and I blame Motorola. So it's just kind of like, I don't fault them for that. But I will say, if we're talking about the tech, KATT and Play-Doh from a design perspective make no sense.
No.
Like, the other three vehicles are clear-cut Ford vehicles. Like, we know why we are here. This is a commercial for these three makes and models of our vehicles. But the bikes look like they were made out of, like, spray-painted construction paper. Like, it looks cool as the combo car, but separately, you can almost see the panels kind of, like, trying not to fly off when they're in motion. Like, they're very cheaply made to the point where you're like, was this the original concept, or was this something you had to make on the fly when like Ford declined to let you have their experimental motorcycles? You know, like that bothered me.
Yeah, well, just to be more clear for people who haven't seen this show, so you have Trek and Erica, and they have combining motorcycles. So they usually appear not separately, but in this weird futuristic looking car, which to me just looks like the worst RC toy car circa 1986. Like it's really goofy looking. But like if a bad guy shoots a missile or a laser at them or is like doing chicken with them, then they will split. And now the card shell disappears and they're just two motorcycles, like you said, that are awkward. And then it's just weird to me because that futuristic car design is so conspicuous. Like the other cars could just drive on the freeway or drive, you know, around a street and not look suspicious. But there's an episode where they're like sneaking into a party, like Trek and Erica, and they're pulling down this like residential street in that car. I'm like, everybody is going to say, what is happening here? But also the idea that they're supposed to be like a team, right? And if the whole show was just about like one car like that and the pair learning to be the best co-pilots, they have to be in sync like Pacific Rim or something, that would be one thing. But overall, like you say, it stands out like a sore thumb compared to what the rest of the team is driving, which is just normal cars that can sometimes shoot a laser or a rocket out of it, pretty much.
Yeah, it's kind of like, why come up with this combo technology if it doesn't apply to all the cars? Like, what if they could like form up into like an aircraft carrier or something, you know, like that? That's what I felt was missing. But just for the people at home, like if you can't Google it, this thing is basically, if you went to KB Toys in 1990, it would be on the shelf called Future Car. It was by a company you've never heard of. They never sold any, but like that's exactly what you would be in for. It's just Future Car. It comes with its own batteries. It'd be next to that giant motorcycle with that giant highway cop on it. Like everybody knows that one. It's almost like two shows were put together where it's like, well, we got this show called Combo Car that didn't get off the ground, and you guys need some more vehicles. How about we just, you know,
Combo Car. Sponsored by Combos. Snack
Right.
treats. Oh, anyway, well, Will, I mean, this show obviously only lasted the one season. It's not fondly remembered. Is there anything else that you blame that on?
I think it's the pacing, because it starts as a show that is completely trying to do its own thing. And I don't know if you noticed this in the episodes you watched, because we've talked about syndication a lot lately, like first run syndication. And like when it first started, they were clearly just firing these shows out. And like, so there's not a lot of time for character development. But this show, I feel like, was filmed in two different batches, because sometimes I forget it was only one season. There's a sharp turn in the middle of the series when they find out like the head of flag is corrupt, and Kyle becomes like field leader and team leader, and he gets control of flag. But it's also at this point when they go whole hog into the quest for Michael Knight. So if they had paced that out better in terms of like maybe leave the Michael Knight stuff, instead they cram it in that second half, and it's such a new dynamic with like Kyle is flag. Maybe end the season with that, like find out that flag was corrupt at that point and have the Michael Knight quest in a season 2. I feel like it had more of a chance if it had coasted on the name for all 22 episodes, because it drove away any fans it had like acquired by that like sharp left turn.
Because like we said, I mean, there are things to like about it, and it was trying to set its own pace and be its own thing. And yeah, like, and ultimately, like, speaking of Kyle, I will say, like you mentioned him, he comes across as a leader. I just saw him as kind of like a little skinny blonde wiener, like middle management guy.
That's most leaders.
Yeah. Well, I didn't buy him at the beginning of the series, but yeah, the back half of the series, it looks like he was actually going to the gym and bulking up, and he gets like more serious and more cool. Like, so I did like him at the end, but at the beginning, I'm just like, who is this guy? Like, why does everybody follow him and trust him? But then at the end, I'm like, oh, okay, he's going to be in charge of everything. This makes sense.
It's like two different shows. The only problem is the tech doesn't change. You know, it's like as a show like that increases compared to Viper. Again, Viper was just like 5 seasons of like, hey, look at this awesome car. But just like Out of This World, every season Viper got something new. It'd be like, oh, Viper's got a drone now. Oh, Viper's got an EMP now. Oh, well, we can't do the snake skin anymore because that costs too much. So now Viper just turned silver, you know? But it's like the tech stayed the same. The personalities of these cars stayed the same. Like you said, there's the human component and the car component, but as a whole, there is no growth over the course of these 22 episodes.
Yeah, so unfortunately, you know, this was a patient that needed an upgrade and never got it. But maybe we had a few ideas that we could use to resuscitate Team Knight Rider as the show doctors. I will say this. If you must have a team of people who pilot vehicles with AI personalities, and I am not advocating for that at all, at least have some variety in what each member of the team is riding in. So this is what I say. Give me a talking helicopter. Give me Night Boat, the crime-solving boat. Give me a dune buggy or a tow truck, not the 1997 line of Ford cars and trucks that I could drive onto any car dealership lot in the United States and take for a test drive. Give me something aspirational that I think is cool, that is doing something interesting. And also give me each episode focusing on a mission that only one of the vehicles is needed for. So we can focus on getting to know that driver, that vehicle. Those would be my rules as a showrunner. However, to fix this incarnation specifically, if we're going to revamp for a season 2, I would drop everyone on the team except for Trek and Erica. Because 2 people can be a team. And if you count the AI vehicles, that's a full lineup of personalities. To me, you kind of reposition it. Trek is the quirky, cerebral man in the chair who reluctantly gets pulled into the field, while Erica is the adrenaline junkie who's focused on atoning for her past sins as a criminal. She jumps headfirst into missions without thinking sometimes, but she's always able to improvise enough to save the day with the help from Trek. And they select which AI vehicle they need for each mission, and then it's off to the races. So they have a fleet to choose from, but they are the team, they are the specialists. They don't always. Now, occasionally, I say you can call the whole fleet of night vehicles into action, and those are like the big event episodes. It's like, oh, they're all in it together. But I really think you need to pare it down and make it kind of a buddy cop type of show. And I think that would be much more interesting than they're just spreading too thin the concept with too many people. And I want more fun. And even though, like, you know, again, I was praising like the variety of plots and the things they're doing, I do think that the best chemistry was Trek and Erica, and you can really play with that a lot if it's just the two of them on screen most of the time. So that's my basic revamp idea for what I think could have given the show something different, something interesting. But what do you think, Will?
I like that. I like that a lot. My whole thing, and back to Baywatch Nights, where I don't know if you remember this era, but like a lot of crap survived for a long time. I don't understand how this only got one season. It must have just been way too expensive to make. There is a show that is always in the back of my mind called Poltergeist: The Legacy that had nothing to do with the Poltergeist film series except for like sharing the licensing name, basically. That show lasted 4 seasons and 87 episodes. So if that could work, Team Knight Rider should have gotten at least 3 seasons. So I'm gonna take a page that like I don't do too often. But I'm gonna say I'm not changing anything. Even though I don't like the pacing, I think it would have been resolved in a season 2. At the end of season 2, I gotta kill somebody. It's probably gonna be Duke. I hate to do it because he's there for diversity, but it's probably gonna be Duke. But there are certain other things that have to take place too. Like I said, the technology doesn't improve over the course of this season. It's going to have to improve from season to season. Even the original show did this. KITT got the flip up lights at one point. That wasn't part of the original design. Or like at the end of season 3, when he lost his molecular bonded shell, then he gets super pursuit mode because it's like, well, you're no longer bulletproof, so you better drive fast as hell. That was the purpose of it. So it's like, I need super pursuit mode here, and I need them to call it super pursuit mode so you can be like, hey, they said the thing. We need to start catering to Knight Rider fans who like still exist and are half the reason this thing is still on. But then I also feel like season 3, I don't know anything about Christine Steele because she really hasn't acted in 20 years, but I get the vibe that she's the cast member that you would lose to contract negotiations. She gives off that energy of like, oh yeah, she's the one who's leaving. So then you put in Kari War, who is like a career designated hitter for sci-fi and action stuff. So you bring in Kari War, you get your hot redhead for a season. She kind of clashes with Erica because Erica's used to be in the hot one. And then like you ride that out for a season. Kari War never stays long. So then for like the 4th season, then you do that complete retool like you were mentioning, where it's just Trek and Erica at this point. Kyle wears a suit. He's no longer in the field. Their headquarters is like the Duke Memorial built, you know, because like we gotta remember there was a Duke at one point. And
speaking of which, if Duke is dead, for people who don't know, his biggest claim to fame, if you ask me, is that he is one of the dead football players in Beetlejuice. And he's the one that's like, Coach, I don't think we made it out of that wreck alive. She's like, you know, so anyway, that's kind of what he's known for. That's kind of what he does here. He's just a big, dumb lunkhead. So
I didn't know that was him. Like,
yeah.
I know that his brother and his father played in the NFL, but like, I didn't know that was him and Beat. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, now Duke has to die. But we'll bring in like a smooth, younger black guy, kind of like Baywatch Nights did.
There we go.
Like, so like that's your 4 seasons. That is your German DVD box set right there.
Well, it was quite a ride with Team Knight Rider. Like I said, overall, I did enjoy the series. As nonsensical as it kind of becomes, like you say, when they're really cramming in the mythology ultimately. But it is a fun series. If you want to watch it, we had to hunt it down because it is hard to locate. But if you get the Fandango at Home app, it is there for free. You don't have to like subscribe or pay for it. It's a free service. You just like set up your quick account and then you can watch Fandango at home. And they have Knight Rider and Team Knight Rider on there.
And lucky for you, you found that out before you went out and bought the Knight Rider 40th anniversary edition from Germany just to get them on. I don't even know if these things play.
Speaking of free to view and Fandango at Home, our next episode is the start of a 2-part exploration that's really leading up to another series that I never knew existed that I found while scanning the Fandango at Home app, and that was Women of the House. I don't know anything about Women of the House other than it has Delta Burke in it. But when I brought it up, Will knew all about it. And he said, yeah, you have to cover designing women if you want to talk about Women of the House. Just like if you gotta know what a crumpet is if you're going to talk about cricket. So we are going to get into designing women on our next episode. You might say, that's not obscure. It's not forgotten. It was very popular for 7 seasons on network TV. It's free on Tubi. It's on Amazon Prime. It's on Hulu. But there is some stuff in there, especially the later seasons that most people don't remember. That is probably what we will focus on in particular. The changes the show went through, the behind the scenes drama with Delta Burke, which led to Women of the House, which she was the star of. So this is something to look forward to, this 2-part series as we kick off the new year. So stay tuned and stay connected with us on social media at Remember Show Pod. Tell your friends, share it around, and until next time, we're changing the channel.
This has been a presentation of Geekster Media.